Am I wrong for asking for a paternity test? Because the dates aren't sitting right with me. When I got that message yesterday, I can't lie, my stomach dropped. It had been months since I'd last heard from her. 4 months, to be exact. No calls, no texts, nothing. Then, out of the blue, a notification pops up and there it is, a scan picture. Her message, "You're the dad." I sat there staring at my phone, trying to process what I was seeing. It felt surreal. I hadn't spoken to her since we broke up, and now she's telling me I'm about to be a father. My first reaction wasn't excitement, fear, or even anger. It was confusion. How could she just drop this bombshell on me without any warning? Still, I tried to keep calm. I knew there was no point in freaking out before I had all the details. I asked her how far along she was. It seemed like a logical first question, right? After all, if she was sending me a scan picture, she had to be a few months in. But even as I typed it out, something didn't feel right. I couldn't put my finger on it yet, but I already had questions swirling in my mind. When she replied, she said she was 13 weeks pregnant. 13 weeks. That's roughly 3 months and a bit. And while she explained that she hadn't known she was pregnant at first due to her irregular periods, the timeline immediately started to bother me. If she was 3 months pregnant, that meant the conception happened after we broke up, or at least very close to it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But for now, I just listened, trying to piece it all together. We broke up exactly 4 months ago. I know this because I've replayed the end of that relationship in my mind more times than I care to admit. It wasn't some big, dramatic fallout. No screaming matches, no slammed doors. It was just one of those things where we both realized we weren't working anymore. I thought we'd moved on. Since the breakup, there'd been no contact at all. Not a single text, no attempts to check in, no accidental run-ins. We'd completely closed that chapter, or so I thought. I assumed she was doing her thing, and I was focused on mine. To be honest, I wasn't even bitter about it anymore. So I'd accepted that it was over, and while I didn't wish her any harm, I also didn't expect to hear from her again. That's why her message blindsided me. 4 months of silence, and then, bam. A scan picture, a short message, and a whole lot of unanswered questions. I tried to remember our last few days together before the breakup, searching for any clues I might have missed. The last time we were intimate was the night before we called it quits. That much I'm sure of. So, doing some quick math in my head, I started to feel uneasy. If she was 13 weeks pregnant, then the timing didn't add up. 13 weeks is just over 3 months. We broke up 4 months ago. There's a whole month unaccounted for. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe there was some medical explanation I wasn't aware of. I'm not exactly an expert on pregnancy timelines, so I tried to keep an open mind. But even as I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't adding up. In that moment, I didn't feel like I was hearing from an ex-girlfriend. I felt like I was being pulled into something bigger, something I didn't fully understand yet. And that scared me. The message was short and to the point. Here's the scan. You're the dad. No build-up, no explanation, just a blunt declaration that my life was about to change in ways I hadn't imagined. I didn't even know how to respond at first. I stared at the picture she'd sent, a grainy black and white ultrasound image. I could see the outline of what was supposed to be my child, but it didn't feel real. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to say. A simple congratulations felt wrong, and are you sure Mad seemed too blunt, so I went with the most neutral thing I could think of. How far along are you? I figured that was a reasonable question to ask. She had to know I'd want some kind of timeline to process this. Her reply came quickly. 13 weeks. She explained that her periods were irregular, so she didn't find out she was pregnant right away. By the time she got the scan done, she was already in her 2nd trimester. I read her message a few times, letting the words sink in. 13 weeks. That's just over 3 months. The math was simple enough, but the numbers weren't sitting right with me. We broke up 4 months ago. 4 months since we last spoke. 4 months since we were together in any way. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I kept my response calm. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked. Her answer was one I couldn't really argue with. I was scared. Fair enough, I thought. I could understand why she might have hesitated, but still, The dates didn't add up in my head, and the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. Something wasn't right. After she said she was 13 weeks along, I couldn't let it go. The timeline didn't make sense, and my mind kept circling back to that one simple question. How could this be? I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the math was nagging at me like a splinter I couldn't pull out. I tried to approach it logically. Okay, if you're 13 weeks, I started, that's around 3 months, right? She agreed, sounding a little hesitant, like she already knew where I was going with this. But we broke up 4 months ago, I continued, laying it all out as plainly as I could. So how does that work? Her response came fast, and it was clear she didn't appreciate the question. Pregnancies don't work exactly like that, she said. It takes a few weeks after you actually conceive for the pregnancy to show up on scans, and they count from a different date anyway. You're definitely the dad. I wasn't trying to accuse her of lying. I just genuinely didn't understand. I'm not saying I'm not, I told her, trying to stay calm. I'm just saying the timeline is confusing me. If we broke up 4 months ago, that's about 17 weeks. There's a gap there that I can't ignore. Her tone shifted then. Defensive, sharp. You're overthinking it, she said. You are the dad, and that's it. I wasn't satisfied. I told her it wasn't about overthinking, it was about facts. I wasn't accusing her of anything, but I also couldn't just blindly accept what she was saying without more clarity. The conversation was tense, and I could tell she was getting more upset, but I couldn't let it go. I needed to know the truth. There was too much at stake to just take her word for it. When I pressed her about the timeline, she sighed, like she was tired of the conversation already. Look, she said, pregnancy isn't as straightforward as you're making it out to be. She went on to explain how the timing of pregnancy is calculated. Apparently, doctors don't start counting from the day you actually conceive. They count from the first day of your last period. She said it's common for there to be a gap between when you have sex and when the pregnancy technically starts. I listened carefully, trying to piece together what she was saying. To be fair, I wasn't an expert on pregnancy, and I wasn't going to pretend I knew all the ins and outs of how it worked. But even with her explanation, something still didn't sit right with me. Okay, I said, trying to keep my tone even. So what you're saying is the dates might look off because of how doctors calculate things. She confirmed this, sounding exasperated, like she couldn't believe I was questioning her. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But the whole situation felt rushed, like she was throwing information at me to shut down the conversation instead of addressing my concerns. I wasn't accusing her of anything. I just needed more clarity. Why didn't you tell me as soon as you found out? I asked. Her answer came quickly. I was scared, she said again. I didn't know how you'd react. I nodded to myself, trying to understand. I could imagine her hesitation, but the timing was still gnawing at me. There was a gap in the story that I couldn't ignore, no matter how much I wanted to move past it. Something still felt off. After we finished that conversation, I sat down to really think about the numbers. I couldn't help it, my brain wouldn't let me move on. I kept coming back to the timeline, running the math over and over, like it would somehow change if I looked at it long enough. She said she was 13 weeks pregnant. 13 weeks, that's just over 3 months, right? And we broke up 4 months ago. 4 months equals roughly 17 weeks. Even if you account for the fact that pregnancy is calculated differently, there's still a month unaccounted for. The last time we were together physically was the day before we broke up. That much I'm absolutely sure of. I remember it clearly, because at the time I thought maybe things were turning a corner for us. I thought maybe we were working towards something better. Turns out we weren't. So, if that was the last time we were together, how does the timing make sense? How can she be 13 weeks pregnant now when it's been 17 weeks since we broke up? That's a gap I couldn't just ignore. I started researching online, looking up how pregnancy is calculated. She was right about one thing. Doctors do start counting from the first day of the last period, not from the actual date of conception. But even with that adjustment, the math still didn't add up. I wasn't trying to accuse her of anything shady, but the gap was real, and I couldn't pretend it wasn't there. I needed answers, not just for me, but for the future of this child if it was mine. I told myself I wasn't being unreasonable. Anyone in my position would want clarity, right? But as much as I tried to focus on the logic of it, there was this growing knot in my stomach. The numbers weren't lying, and I was starting to worry that maybe there was more to this story than she was letting on. I couldn't keep my concerns bottled up any longer. The math wasn't adding up, and I needed to address it directly. So I called her. I figured a conversation like this needed to happen in real time, not through text messages. When she answered, I could hear the tension in her voice before I even said anything. "What now?" she asked, already defensive. I told her straight up that the dates didn't make sense to me. I explained, calmly but firmly, that we broke up 4 months ago, 17 weeks, and yet she was saying she was 13 weeks pregnant. "There's a gap there," I said. "I'm not trying to accuse you of anything, but I don't understand how that works." She didn't take it well. Her tone shifted immediately. "I've already explained this to you," she snapped. "Pregnancy isn't an exact science. It takes time to show up, and they don't calculate it the way you think they do." I tried to keep my cool, but her tone was getting under my skin. "I'm not saying you're lying," I said. "I'm just saying the timeline is confusing and I need clarity. This isn't a small thing, it's huge. If I'm the dad, I need to be sure." That seemed to push her over the edge. She accused me of not trusting her, of trying to dodge responsibility, and of making her feel like she was the bad guy. "Why would I lie about this?" she demanded. "You think I want to deal with this drama?" Her reaction only made me more suspicious. I told her I wasn't accusing her of lying. I just wanted answers. But the more defensive she got, the more I felt like something wasn't right. The conversation spiraled into a heated back and forth. No matter how calmly I tried to explain my point, she seemed intent on shutting it down. "Pregnancy isn't as simple as counting backwards from today," she said. "It's not like you can pinpoint the exact moment it happened." I told her I understood that, but the numbers still didn't make sense to me. "I'm not saying I need to know the exact second," I said. "I just need to understand how we went from breaking up 4 months ago to you being 13 weeks pregnant now. There's a gap, and it's not adding up." She started rattling off more details about how pregnancy is calculated. She mentioned how doctors count from the first day of the last period and how it could take a couple of weeks after conception for the pregnancy to be detectable. "It's all medical stuff," she said, "and it doesn't work the way you think it does." I admitted I wasn't an expert on pregnancy, but I wasn't going to let that stop me from asking questions. "I'm not trying to accuse you of anything," I said again. "I just need to feel confident about this. If I'm the dad, I'll take full responsibility. But I can't ignore the dates, they just don't make sense to me." Her response was sharp. "You're overcomplicating this," she said. "You don't trust me and it's ridiculous. I'm telling you, you're the father, and there's no reason to doubt it." But the thing was, I did have a reason to doubt it. The numbers. No matter how much she tried to explain it away, the gap between 13 weeks and 4 months kept gnawing at me. I wasn't trying to accuse her of lying, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. By the end of the call, we were both frustrated. She felt attacked, and I felt like my concerns were being dismissed. The conversation ended on a sour note, with no real resolution in sight. After the call, I couldn't stop replaying her words in my head. She was adamant, absolutely certain that I was the father. Her confidence was unshakable, and she didn't seem to understand why I needed further proof. From her perspective, this was simple. She said she hadn't been with anyone else before or around the time we broke up. "The dates don't matter," she'd told me firmly. "You're the only one it could be." She'd even gone as far as to say that I was making a big deal out of nothing. "Do you think I'd be coming to you with this if I wasn't sure?" she asked. Her tone was sharp, almost accusatory, like my doubts were an insult to her integrity. I tried to remind myself that her frustration might just be fear or stress. It couldn't be easy to find out you're pregnant, especially after a breakup. Maybe she was lashing out because she felt vulnerable. Still, her defensiveness didn't sit right with me. She kept repeating that the test was unnecessary, that I should trust her word. "You're just looking for excuses to avoid responsibility," she said at one point. That stung, because I'd never said I wouldn't step up. All I wanted was clarity. It wasn't just her words, though. It was her tone, her refusal to even entertain the possibility that the dates might not align perfectly. I wasn't accusing her of anything. at least not yet. But I couldn't ignore how hard she was pushing back. I told myself that maybe she just didn't understand where I was coming from. Maybe to her, my doubts felt like an attack, but to me, they were necessary. I wasn't trying to dodge anything. I just needed to be sure. At some point during our conversations, I asked a question that had been lingering in the back of my mind. I didn't really want to ask it. It felt accusatory, and I wasn't trying to start more drama, but I couldn't ignore the thought any longer. "Have you been with anyone else since we broke up?" I asked, doing my best to keep my tone neutral. There was a pause on the other end of the line. It wasn't long, but it was just long enough to make my chest tighten. "Why would you even ask that?" she said, her voice sharp. "It's not an accusation," I said quickly. "I just think it's a fair question given the timing. If I'm going to take responsibility, I need to know everything." She sighed heavily before answering. "Yeah, I was with someone once, but it was after I found out we were done for good. And we used protection, so there's no way it could be his." I wasn't sure how to feel about that. On one hand, I appreciated her honesty. On the other hand, it didn't exactly erase my doubts. Protection isn't foolproof, and the fact that there was even a possibility, even a small one, added another layer of uncertainty. She seemed frustrated by my reaction, like the question itself was offensive. "It has nothing to do with this," she insisted. "You're the dad, not him. I wouldn't even be telling you if I wasn't sure." But the seed of doubt was already planted. I wasn't saying she was lying, and I wasn't accusing her of anything shady. I just needed to consider all the facts. Even so, her reaction stuck with me. She was so quick to dismiss my concerns, so adamant that I was the father. But how could she be so certain, especially when there were still so many unanswered questions? I didn't know what to think anymore. All I knew was that I needed that test more than ever. After hearing her admit she'd been with someone else, protected or not, I realized there was no way I could move forward without absolute clarity. The timeline already didn't make sense, and now there was another variable in the mix. I couldn't just take her word for it. That's when I decided to be upfront. I told her I wanted a paternity test. As soon as I said the words, I could feel the shift in her tone. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice rising. "You're really going to make me go through that just because you're paranoid?" "It's not about paranoia," I said firmly. "It's about being sure. This is a huge responsibility, and I'm not going to take it lightly. If the baby is mine, I'll do everything I need to do. But until we're 100% certain, I can't just pretend everything lines up." Her reaction was explosive. She accused me of questioning her character, of making her feel like she'd done something wrong. "You think I'm lying to you? After everything? Do you know how hard this is for me?" I tried to explain that it wasn't about trust. It was about clarity. "This isn't about you," I said. "It's about the baby. I'm not saying you're lying, but the timeline doesn't add up, and you even said you were with someone else. I have every right to ask for a test." That last point seemed to hit a nerve. "We used protection," she snapped. "Why do you keep bringing that up? It's not his, it's yours. You're the father, and you need to accept that." But I couldn't. Not yet. I stood my ground, even as the conversation became more heated. I knew I wouldn't be able to move forward without the test. It wasn't negotiable. Not long after our heated conversation, my phone started lighting up with messages from numbers I didn't recognize. At first, I ignored them, assuming they were spam or something unimportant. But when I finally checked, I realized they were from her family, her mom and her sister, to be exact. The messages didn't hold back. "How dare you question her like this?" one read. "She's going through enough without you accusing her of lying." Another one said, "You're the dad. Step up and stop being a prick." I could feel my frustration growing with every word I read. It wasn't like I was refusing to take responsibility. I'd made it clear from the start that I would, but only if we confirmed the baby was mine. How was that unreasonable? Her mom sent the longest message, a paragraph about how I was adding unnecessary stress to her daughter's life and how I needed to be a man and accept the situation. Her sister chimed in with a shorter, more aggressive take. "You're just looking for an excuse to bail. Grow up." It felt like they were ganging up on me without even trying to understand my side. They were treating me like I was some deadbeat, trying to run away from responsibility when all I wanted was clarity. I didn't respond to the messages. Part of me wanted to explain my reasoning, but I knew it wouldn't matter. They'd already made up their minds about me. Anything I said would just add fuel to the fire. The whole situation was exhausting. I felt like I was being cornered, like everyone was piling on without even considering that I might have a valid reason for my doubts. The timeline still didn't make sense, and now, with her family involved, I felt more isolated than ever. I knew standing my ground would make me the villain in their eyes, but I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to accept this without proof, no matter how much pressure they put on me. After the barrage of messages from her family, I realized I needed to take a step back and collect my thoughts. I wasn't trying to be stubborn or hurt anyone, but the pressure from all sides was starting to get to me. I needed to be clear about why I was standing my ground. I decided to message her directly. "Look," I wrote, "I'm not trying to make this harder on you. I understand this isn't easy for you, but you have to see where I'm coming from." I explained everything as plainly as I could. I reminded her about the timeline. 4 months since we broke up, but only 13 weeks pregnant. I told her again that it wasn't about not trusting her. It was about the numbers not adding up in my head. "If I'm going to step into this role as a father," I said, "I need to be absolutely sure. That's not me running away from responsibility. It's me trying to do the right thing." Her response came quickly, and it was just as defensive as before. "You're still hung up on the dates," she wrote. "I already explained how pregnancy works. This is ridiculous." I tried to keep the conversation calm, but it felt like I was hitting a wall. "I get that you've explained it," I said, "but the numbers still don't sit right with me. I just need to be sure." She accused me of making the situation all about me, of focusing on details instead of supporting her. I told her that wasn't fair. "This isn't just about you," I said. "It's about the baby and making sure we do what's right for them." But no matter how much I explained, it felt like we were speaking two different languages. My doubts remained, and so did her frustration. The more I tried to explain myself, the more it seemed like I was digging myself into a deeper hole. Every message, every attempt at reasoning with her seemed to make things worse. She wasn't just frustrated anymore, she was angry. "You're unbelievable," she said in one of her texts. "Do you even understand how hard this is for me? I'm pregnant, I'm scared, and instead of stepping up, you're treating me like I'm some liar." I tried to tell her that I wasn't accusing her of lying. "This isn't about trust," I said again. "It's about clarity. It's about making sure everything lines up so I can move forward with no doubts." Her response came back almost instantly. "Stop saying it's not about trust. It's exactly that. If you trusted me, you wouldn't be asking for a test in the first place." I felt like I was stuck in an endless loop. I told her I wasn't accusing her, but I couldn't ignore the gap in the timeline. She kept insisting that the test wasn't necessary, that I should just believe her. "Do you know how insulting this is?" she asked. "You're basically calling me a cheat." I reminded her as calmly as I could that she'd admitted to being with someone else after we broke up. "You told me yourself," I said. "How can I not consider that when the dates don't match?" That only made things worse. "I told you we use protection," she snapped. "It's not his, it's yours. I wouldn't even be telling you if I wasn't sure." I didn't know how to respond to that. I understood her anger. I really did. But I couldn't ignore my doubts. No matter how many times she told me to trust her, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. By the end of the conversation, we were both exhausted. She was furious, and I was frustrated. The gap between us felt wider than ever, and I started to wonder if there was any way to bridge it. After that last argument, I knew there was no point in going back and forth anymore. No matter how much I tried to explain myself, it was clear she wasn't going to see things from my perspective, and honestly, I couldn't blame her for being upset. The situation wasn't easy for either of us. Still, I couldn't ignore the nagging voice in my head that kept saying, "You need to be sure." I didn't think I was being unreasonable. If the roles were reversed, I'd like to think she'd want the same clarity before committing to something so life-altering. I decided to make my position crystal clear. I messaged her one last time. "Listen, I'm not backing down on this. I'll take full responsibility if the test shows I'm the dad, but until then, I need to know for sure. This isn't negotiable." Her response was predictable, another round of frustration and accusations. "You're just trying to find a way out," she said. "You don't even care about me or the baby." That last part hit a nerve. I told her she was wrong, that I cared deeply about doing the right thing, but I wasn't going to be bullied into accepting something I wasn't certain about. "This isn't about dodging responsibility," I wrote. "It's about making sure I do the right thing in the right way." She called me cold, selfish, and heartless, but I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to protect myself from making a mistake I couldn't undo. The conversation ended with her saying, "Fine, we'll do your stupid test, but you're going to feel like an idiot when it comes back saying you're the dad." Maybe I would, but at least I'd know for sure. After our last conversation, I sat in silence for what felt like hours, replaying everything she'd said. The anger, the defensiveness, the insistence, it all swirled in my mind, making me question not only the situation, but also myself. Was I being unreasonable? Was I overthinking this? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that her reaction to the paternity test was a little too strong. If she was so sure I was the father, why did the idea of confirming it upset her so much? To me, it seemed like the simplest way to settle everything. Yet, every time I brought it up, it turned into a fight. I started to wonder if there was something she wasn't telling me. Maybe she was afraid the test would confirm my doubts, or maybe she was just hurt that I didn't blindly trust her. Either way, her refusal to meet me halfway made me feel like there was more to this than she was letting on. And then there was her family. Why were they so quick to jump to her defense, calling me names and accusing me of running away? If the situation was as clear-cut as she claimed, wouldn't they be encouraging me to take the test, just to shut me up? The more I thought about it, the more confused I became. I didn't want to assume the worst, but the defensiveness from everyone involved made it hard not to. All I wanted was clarity, but I felt like I was being punished for even asking. Deep down, I hoped the test would prove her right. I hoped it would put my doubts to rest and allow us to move forward. But until then, I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling in my gut. Something about this whole situation didn't feel right, and I wasn't going to let anyone guilt me into pretending otherwise. In the end, I wasn't just questioning her motives, I was questioning mine. Was I doing this for the right reasons, or was I just looking for a reason to keep my distance? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew I needed one soon. The weight of the situation started to sink in, and for the first time in days I felt genuinely overwhelmed. It wasn't just about the doubts anymore, it was about everything. The anger, the accusations, the pressure from her family, it was all piling up, and I didn't know how much more I could take. I kept telling myself I was doing the right thing, but it didn't make the guilt go away. Maybe I was being cold. Maybe I should have trusted her word instead of fixating on the numbers. But at the same time, how could I ignore something that felt so glaringly off? Every time I thought about the possibility of being a father, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't fully untangle. Fear, excitement, confusion, and doubt all fought for space in my head. I wanted to step up if the child was mine. I wanted to be the kind of dad that a kid could rely on, but I couldn't commit to that role without knowing for sure. Then there was the relationship we had left behind. I didn't have feelings for her anymore, not like that. But I couldn't deny that this situation had stirred up old emotions. Not love exactly, but something close to it. A sense of responsibility maybe, or regret for how things had ended between us. In my quieter moments, I wondered how we had gotten here. Just a few months ago, we were two people trying to figure out our futures, and now we were entangled in something so much bigger. But no matter how much I doubted myself or reflected on the past, one thing remained clear. I needed that test. It was the only way to move forward for both of us. Until then, all I could do was sit with the uncertainty and hope I wasn't making a huge mistake. After all the arguments, accusations, and sleepless nights, I decided it was time to take action. Enough of the back and forth. If I wanted clarity, I had to make it happen. I started looking into how to arrange a paternity test. It wasn't as straightforward as I'd hoped. I quickly realized there were steps involved: getting her consent, scheduling an appointment, and dealing with the waiting period for results. Each step felt like another hurdle, another opportunity for things to go wrong. I reached out to her again, trying to keep the conversation as neutral as possible. "I've been looking into how we can get the test done," I said. There are labs nearby that can do it, and I can cover the cost. We just need to schedule it." Her response was cold. "If you're so desperate for this stupid test, fine, let me know where and when." Her tone stung, but I pushed past it. I wasn't going to let her frustration derail the process. I told her I'd handle all the arrangements and send her the details once everything was set up. The logistics took some time to figure out. I had to research reliable testing facilities and make sure everything was legally sound. The last thing I wanted was for the results to be called into question later. It felt like a lot of work for something that should have been simple, but I knew it was necessary. Once I had everything lined up, I sent her the information. I kept my message short and to the point: the date, the time, and the address of the lab. "This will give us both the answers we need," I wrote, trying to remind her that this was about more than just me. She didn't respond right away, but when she did, it was clear she wasn't happy. "Fine," she said, "let's get it over with." It wasn't the reassurance I'd hoped for, but at least we were moving forward. The test was scheduled, and soon I'd have the clarity I'd been searching for. Until then, all I could do was wait. With the test scheduled and the date set, I finally had a moment to breathe. For the first time in what felt like weeks, I wasn't arguing with her or fielding angry messages from her family. It was quiet, and that silence gave me space to think about everything that had led to this point. I kept asking myself the same question: am I doing the right thing? I wanted to believe I was. I wasn't asking for the test out of malice or mistrust. I just needed to know the truth. But the way she reacted, the way her family painted me as the villain, made me wonder if I'd crossed a line. Part of me worried about what the results would say. If the test proved I wasn't the father, would she hate me for doubting her? If it proved I was, would I be able to shake the guilt of not believing her from the start? Either way, I knew this situation would leave scars on both of us. I also thought about the child. If the test showed I was the father, everything would change. My life would no longer be just mine. I'd have a responsibility to this little person who didn't ask to be part of this messy situation. It was a scary thought, but also strangely grounding. And if the test showed I wasn't the father, I didn't even know how to prepare for that possibility. What would that mean for her, for me, for the life she was building around this baby? In the quiet of that moment, all I could do was hope that the test would bring the answers we both needed. Whatever the outcome, I promised myself I'd face it with honesty and integrity. It was the least I could do. Now that I've told you the whole story, I have to ask, am I the asshole here? From my perspective, all I've been trying to do is get clarity. It's not like I'm denying responsibility or trying to walk away from the situation. I've said from the beginning that if the child is mine, I'll step up and be the father they deserve. That's not even a question. But everything about the timeline threw me off. We broke up 4 months ago and she's saying she's 13 weeks pregnant. That's a gap of about a month. Then she admits she was with someone else. Protected, sure, but that's still another factor to consider. It just doesn't add up in my head. Am I wrong for needing proof before I commit to something this big? Her reaction, though, it really got to me. She's been defensive and angry every step of the way, and I get it to a degree. No one wants their word questioned, especially in a situation as sensitive as this. But at the same time, why is she so against the test? If she's so sure I'm the father, wouldn't she want to clear up my doubts and move on? And then there's her family, calling me names and accusing me of dodging responsibility. That's not fair. I've done nothing but try to handle this situation logically. Is it really that unreasonable to want confirmation? I don't know anymore. Maybe I've been too cold, too logical. Maybe I should have trusted her from the start. But when the timeline doesn't make sense and there are other factors involved, how do I just blindly accept what I'm being told? So tell me, am I wrong for asking for a paternity test? Was I wrong to put my foot down and demand clarity? Or would anyone in my position have done the same thing? I'll leave it up to you to decide.